All right, I think we're live with the Referrals While You Sleep show. And today we're going to talk about what the CIA agents have actually told you about uh, basically how to have an amazing real estate career. Like you're studying from a CIA agent and you're like, this is what Referrals While You Sleep does.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. So yeah, I've been there's a guy that's been making sort of the rounds on the podcast circuit, right? He's been appearing on a lot of different podcasts, uh, really doing a good job of getting in front of the audience that he wants to. He seems to have hit a little bit like with a lot of those sorts of tactics. You sort of hit a momentum threshold, and then you start getting seen lots of places because it's like other people have seen you. So I mean, honestly, even what he's doing is a great example of part of really some of what Referrals While You Sleep does, in the sense of, when one person sees you, that it starts to become easier to get the next one and the next one and the next one. Right. So anyway, but this guy's name is Andrew Bustamante. And so I've been seeing his stuff around. I found it to be really interesting, really captivating. His basic story, he was an undercover field operative for the CIA for like 7 years or something. He is not anymore, and at this point, right at this point, he has a company called Everyday Spy, where what they're doing is they're trying to teach everyday people how some of the skill sets that they learn in CIA could be applied to your life in order to do better in business, have better interactions in your relationships, and a lot of things like that. So it's kind of an interesting source of the material. Creates for a captivating thing. I mean, we all think of like James Bond and Jason Bourne and that sort of thing, but so you get that sort of picture, but applied to practical takeaways. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've seen some stuff, Ryan, kind of like a Chris Voss, who was the FBI negotiator that's created a company. That's
Right.
what Bustamante, that kind of like that we've talked about the likability switch,
Yep.
which I think he was a CIA operative that wrote that book.
Right.
He, overseas doing that. Yeah, and
Right.
what stuck out to you? What was it that you're like, this explains what's happening?
Yeah, so I personally have a strategy where this is a whole can of worms around how I research and learn things. But one of the things that I like to do when I find an interesting angle haven't heard before, or something that really stands out as that feels like a really solid way to explain something, or that feels like a really powerful way to look at something, or this feels like a topic that I'd really like to learn more about because it's either interesting or personally relevant. Okay. Um, Andrew Bustamante, on I forget which episode I first heard this, because he talks about it on a few different episodes now that I've seen. He talks about the idea of there's a difference between persuasion and influence. And I'd never heard somebody say it this way. I'd never heard it stated this way, but it made a ton of sense to me when I heard it. And so I latched onto that and I wanted to learn more. Okay. And so in that process, I started diving into just a whole bunch of his episodes, looking on everything that he talks about for influence. And I start collecting a couple of things. One, what I'm seeing him talk about, the frameworks, the tactics, all of that. I collect that together and sort of put it into working documents for myself to be able to leverage, right? But the other thing that I do is I actually look at this is something I've seen you do as well. Uh, Even if somebody wants to teach you something powerfully, it can be really hard to always convey everything that they actually know and understand. Because going from doing to teaching, it's a separate skill set. And so the other thing that I like to do is I like to look and see what are they actually doing that I can relate back to what they're saying they're doing. So I either get a better picture of it or maybe a fuller understanding. So if somebody talks about building out, say, landing pages, instead of just going off of what they describe, I will actually look at their company and see what are they doing on their landing pages. What does that look like? What's the wording look like, etc. So actually looking at the real world practical. Anyway, so I do those two things, and through that process, I've put together a number of things that just stood out. I was like, man, the more that I look into what he's describing here, the more that I'm just like, this fits so perfectly with what Referrals While You Sleep is already doing, right? Not something that needs to be changed, nothing like that. Just what you guys are already doing and why it works so well. You're essentially already deploying tactics that the CIA leverages in order to, get access to secrets from people in other countries to, help our national security and whatnot. And I'm like, that's pretty interesting and pretty powerful. And that's what we're talking about here.
What was the insight that really struck out to you?
So let's start with first the difference between persuasion versus influence. So the way that Andrew described this, he describes it as that essentially persuasion is active, right? It's something that you are actively doing. Like I'm present in a conversation and I'm trying to get you to either do something or believe something, right? And it's a very active thing. It's only ever happening in an active capacity. Now, it might be it might be being done at scale. You might be running ads and the ads persuade somebody, so that could happen. But persuasion is always like somebody has to be actively participating in it for it to happen. Okay. Very often this happens in one-on-one conversations, ads, emails, shows, that sort of thing. Okay. But influence is not active. Influence is what people think and believe, even when they're not actively participating in your materials, right? It's if they read your ad. Influence is when you've actually changed their belief about the world, or you exist in their mind outside of that piece that they just interacted with. Honestly, Andrew Bustamante is somebody right now that through his process and what he's doing, he's done a really good job building influence with me, in the sense of I'm now thinking about the world on my own in ways that are directly influenced by that person and what they're doing, right? So like he exists in my mind outside of me actively watching his videos. And what was interesting about that to me is that idea of really that's what we ultimately want. And that's what you really need in real estate, is you need influence more than you need persuasion. Because, most people aren't going to be persuaded to buy a house, right? Or sell a house, right? Most of them, right, they're ultimately going to end up there. There might be some things that persuade them one way or another a bit, but really that's got kind of a momentum of its own. And what you really need is you need that influence where you exist in their mind when that time comes, and there's nobody else that they want to talk to but you, right? When they're looking to get a loan, when they're looking to buy or sell a house, that's really what you want in that situation. And I never heard it put that way, the difference between persuasion and influence. So that was probably the biggest insight. And then from there, I've been diving into, okay, if we know we want influence, how do we build influence? And that's some of what else, he talks about. But does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm curious about how much time do you think you've spent with him, listening to his stuff and partaking in it?
I don't know if I want to say this out loud. Honestly, at this point, it's part of my personality that when I'm diving in and learning about something, I probably spend a lot more time than most people do when they're interested in something. No joke, I probably have 10 to 20 hours right now invested in just listening to his videos, watching videos, taking notes, researching him, putting together my own stuff. At this point, probably easily 10 to 20 hours since I'm like actively in this vein of studying him.
Yeah. You know what I like about that is, my coach, Jamie Smart, high-end coach, people pay him $60,000 to work with him for a year. And he said, I've been at his events, and he says, out of everyone that's here that's paid a lot of money, how much time have you spent with me?
Right.
And usually like 29 out of the 30 or however many, like the majority have spent at least 8 and often like 15, 20 hours before they've actually given him any money. Right. And I think me, it was the same thing. I listened to his book. I watched a bunch of his webinars, a bunch of the videos that he's recorded. I hopped on
Right.
a number of his, events, and then I plopped down, 12 grand to spend some time with him. That was in
Right.
2018, and I've spent a lot since. And uh, what's cool, I that's one of the reasons we do long video instead
Right.
of just short video, is there's a
Right.
lot of people that want to, one, they need to spend time with you,
Right.
but then also they want to be able to binge you. And if all that you've got is 30, 60, 90-second clips, there's no depth to
Right.
that.
Right.
And so
Right.
long videos actually make bingeable content possible.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And especially like in that moment, if you're in the vein of like, I have these questions or have these thoughts and I want to dive in deep. It's like I already know that this, like, I mean, really that's part of what's happened is that in smaller tests of hearing a clip or two here, smaller doses, I sort of have come to see like, yeah, this guy is saying things that I either haven't heard or from a perspective that's interesting or clear, whatever, it connects with me. So I am more willing to say, all right, now I very specifically want to see what he says about these subjects that I care about. And yes, that's where I'm diving in deep. That's where I'm going in deeper. And so you're right, like that bingeable content sort of idea, you build that trust at the beginning, in whatever way. With him, it was through shorter clips and whatnot that I saw. And then from there, now I trust when I go and I see a conversation with him, it's like I know what to expect. I know, I've seen a consistency there of how he approaches things. So yeah, absolutely.
I love that. Another thing that it reminds me of is, after I consumed Jamie's content, I mean, he's got, literally thousands of hours of
Right.
content online. I was like, all right, I want to know how this corresponds directly to me.
Right.
And so I can either go through his thousands of, like, I know he's an expert, he's
Right.
influenced me. I know I want his help. I can either go through that myself or I can reach out to him and
Right.
figure out, like, it's so much more valuable now. Like, I
Right.
already know that he's got the answers. To just
Right.
reach out to him and say, what is, like, what do I need to do?
Right.
And
Right.
that's really what we're doing with our real estate agents. With these long form videos, when you've got it, one, they can binge it, but then two, they're just like, all right, I don't want to think. Like, I know they're the expert. I don't want to think. Let me just reach out to them and say,
Right.
can you apply all your knowledge to my circumstance?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And
I
so
never thought about
you want to dive into some of like what I saw in terms of the way a CIA agent thinks about these things and how
it.
I'm
Yeah.
seeing that align with what you guys are doing at Referrals While You Sleep to build influence.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. So the first thing that he started talking about, or the first thing I think is worth talking about for this is this concept of sense making. And sense making is essentially this idea that in any relationship and any interchange, everybody is sort of trying to like make sense of whatever is going on. Okay. And there's different levels to this sense making process. And the first level, kind of the default of this process, is avoidance, right? So when you meet a stranger, when you meet somebody that you don't know, or meet might not even be the right word, right? Like think about when you're walking through. Actually, this is a great example for you. When you're walking through a grocery store, the reality is most of the people almost don't exist to you mentally. At least if I'm going to be honest,
Right.
that's kind of how it is for me, right? And it's not that I'm trying to be rude. It's not, but like if I'm walking by somebody I don't know, I I'm not mean, I'm not rude, but I also I don't go out of my way to talk to them, right? I mainly just go about my day. I go about my stuff, right? And that's kind of the foundational thing that you have to get past, is that you have to get past people's default state of they just avoid new contact, right?
Right.
And so we'll talk about this more in a second, but I think it's worthwhile to understand kind of the three different levels so you see how they relate. After avoidance, you get to competition, and competition is all about the exchange of ideas, right? So I'm talking about my things, you're talking about your things, and just that interchange of we're now not avoiding each other, and so now we're like figuring out where to invest in the relationship and how to invest in the relationship, right? And sometimes that competition, becomes very clear of like we're not like it doesn't end well, right? So you make sense of the exchange by going your separate ways intentionally, right? Sometimes you make sense of the situation by saying, "Oh, I now trust this person for this thing," or I may not trust their opinion on anything, but I enjoy spending time with them, right? I've made sense of the relationship, right? And so that's the competition phase. And then you have the last phase, which is compliance. And compliance is essentially like things are sort of settled out and you now understand the relationship, right? It, for the most part, unless something sort of comes in to shake it loose, you understand the relationship. You understand what you trust them for, maybe what you don't trust them for, at least in some silo, in some zone, based on your interactions in that competition phase. And so then the relationship is kind of you've made sense of it, right? And it can change, but it seems like at that phase it doesn't. That it's not necessarily as active of a process, right? So the competition might keep happening. It might keep reinforcing or adapting that final compliance phase. But for the most part, things sort of settle into a groove and somewhat stay there, I think, unless something serious happens. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of that if you can build, I mean, we say, if you build the trust, if you've got it, then when tough things happen in a transaction, you don't have to worry about them firing you because they ate bad food and had a bad dream last night versus, if they're in the competition phase, if they're, if they don't know where you guys are, that'll happen. They'll have a bad dream and wake up and be like, no, this isn't right.
Right.
And,
Right.
when people are working with people in that, you actually don't get out of that usually until after closing.
Right.
It's only after closing that if you start the transaction in avoidance, at best you usually move to that kind of should I really trust you phase.
Right.
And you really don't get past it until post closing. That sounds miserable, by the way.
Because through that entire process, you haven't had enough of a relationship to be able to have them have some sort of trust to anchor back to, some sort of way that they know that the relationship is settled out, right? Like you don't have a foundation to build off of. And really this sense making was probably one of the first ones that I was like, this is exactly what referrals while you sleep really does in terms of making a difference. Because what's your most consistent phrase about what do people want and what do they not want that they typically think they do? What's the phrase? Say it out loud.
Leads or liabilities. You don't want leads. You want compliant clients that know who you are, what you do, and they want to hire you.
Exactly. So you literally use the word of the last phrase of this, which is compliant clients, right? So the last phase of this is compliance. Right. So you, whether you do it or not, you were leveraging CIA skills to say, I want to work with the people that have already had this sense-making process sort of finalized, right? Like it's already in that process, because every lead will start the process in that avoidance phase and needing to go through that process, getting past avoidance, getting into competition before they ultimately settle in compliance. And it's not an easy process to go through, right? Like it does take work, it does take effort, especially when it hasn't happened over time. One of the things that this wasn't through this, but it jives with this. One of the best phrases that I've heard for how you establish trust is that trust equals promises kept over time, right? And that's really how you establish trust. So the more that you make a promise and keep it, the more you build trust. Now, the thing that people miss is while you could get some level of trust, and there are ways to build trust somewhat quickly, it is a lot harder to build trust quickly than it is to build trust with consistency over time.
Right.
And so when you generate a lead, unless you are getting the opportunity to really interact with them and build that trust outside of specifically working the transaction and all of that, you're going to find it a lot harder. Whereas when you're talking to people that already know, like, and trust you, and you're just making sure to stay top of mind with them, you've already filled the bucket. It's mainly just kind of keeping that trust going, keeping that flame that's lit burning, rather than trying to, build the fire, get it going, all of that. And so that really, to me, is probably one of the most, the most interesting elements, is that you figured out, first and foremost, we're going after the right people, because it's drastically easier to maintain a relationship that's already established than it is to build one from scratch. And so by targeting the right people right off the bat, you're making every dollar and every minute you spend drastically more effective. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I've been, saying leads are cheap. Converting them into compliant clients is really expensive in time and treasure. It's the reason that, I'm willing to pay 25 to 33% of my total commission for an out-of-state referral from another agent, because that agent is handing me a compliant client.
Right.
And that is worth it. My last one, I think the total commission was 18 grand. And so my friend got like $6,200, and our client was like, wow, I can't believe you gave him that much. You know what?
Right.
It was totally worth it for me. Right. Because there was really zero follow-up. It was, hey, let's meet, have an initial consultation. Here's the game plan. And it was an enjoyable experience, because they didn't want to avoid me. They wanted to talk to me. They were grateful to talk to me because they had a need, and it was relieving for them that they knew that they had someone. There was no competition. I came in, and of course I've got a system to establish that authority as well.
Right.
And, totally worth it. That makes sense. Did he talk about different things to move people from one level to another?
So in the stuff that I've gone into so far, he's not diving into it a ton, but there are a handful of principles for sure. So one of the most powerful ones, because he sort of talks about this idea of when you're looking at going from avoidance into competition into compliance. I mean, he does have frameworks for that, but that really is more like that. Quite honestly, that's more in the vein of if you're going to do it strategically, then that's about like pickup artist type stuff, if that makes sense. It's more in the vein of like, how do I go from 0 to 1, and how do I try and establish a relationship and get it started so that I could then really go to work of cementing the relationship. So what's nice is you are focusing on people that are already past that. So there are things that you could do, right? And that is its own skill set in and of itself that most people are actually fairly natural at in these sorts of environments, right? Where if you're doing things that you enjoy, if you're doing getting out into the world, you're going to meet people, and those relationships are going to fairly naturally develop. And so your system does a good job of saying, you're already doing the beginning stages. Now, how do we make sure that you're keeping the rest of it, so that you're building that trust, that authority? And so for those, he doesn't get into a ton of specifics, but here's some of what I saw from what he talked about. The biggest one being this idea of there's 4 C's that ultimately build up toward influence. Okay. Of what you do with referrals while you'd sleep, I'd say most of this is just covered with one of them. And then the other things are a little bit more of like kind of what you do and the other things that you do and how you communicate when that opportunity comes up. Like they're still used, but they aren't so much, I don't think, part of referrals while you sleep, if that makes sense. So the first one is consideration. Consideration is essentially understanding their point of view, right? So looking at things from somebody else's point of view, that really will come into play in your interactions and that sort of thing. It may not come through in your mass marketing as much. The other one that isn't as much of a thing that you're doing with referrals while you sleep, but does come into play with how you approach working with clients is collaboration. So collaboration is the idea of saying, how are we working together to achieve something together, as opposed to, settling on something that neither of us wants, right? We're going for the Michael Scott win here of everybody wins, right? So collaboration. And then the final thing is control. So control is essentially where you've established this influence. How do you leverage it? And essentially knowing I've banked goodwill. I have the opportunity to actually ask for this thing or to move forward with this thing, right? And what I love about what you do is that, like, the control part isn't even really a big part of like your sales process, your sales system. There's just sort of an established, they trust you. And so at every step of the way, it's really like you're just moving forward on the collaboration, right? Where you're just continually moving forward. Now you are getting things out of that by establishing, by working with people that will ultimately create a good outcome for you too. So, but the other C in this overall process is really where referrals while you sleep does come into play. And I think it's one of the most powerful, and that's consistency. So consistency, like in this overall sense-making idea, people want to know what to expect, right? People want to know what's going on, to know, honestly, for good or bad, right? Like there's a phrase, it's better the devil you know than the one that you don't, right? Like even that kind of shows that idea of, well, if I know I've got this dog that's always going to bite me, well, I at least know how to prepare for that, rather than a dog that sometimes is nice and sometimes wants to bite your ear off, right? Like, and so consistency is really powerful here in building up to trust. And trust is another one of those really interesting things where when we say trust, we typically mean it in a positive way. But there are some things that we come to trust, which mostly means like consistency, that it's not a good thing, right? Like I very much trust that if I turn on the Hallmark Channel this time of year, I will see a story that I could probably tell you what happens and how it ends without ever even watching it. Right? Because there's an extreme degree of consistency there. Now, does that mean that I want to watch those movies? Well, for me, not really. But for other people who want that thing, they trust. They know that they can find it there, right? And so part of trust is really people knowing what to expect and being able to rely on it. So that's kind of the foundational thing of knowing to expect this. And then separately, this is more where the part of trust comes into play. Is not just the likability, like I like you, but like as in I want the thing that I trust will happen. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's more like, I believe not only that this person can do what they say that they do, but what they say that they could do, I want to have happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's really like in terms of building out that process. And this is the thing that was really interesting to me is, as a CIA operative, they are not typically going into a mission thinking, I'm going to go into this one conversation, establish a relationship, and get them to turn over their nation's secrets to me that night. Right? Like what they're doing is they're implanting themselves in their life, and they become the person that like they hang out and go get beers together, or they hang out and they go play pickleball or whatever. Like they embed them in their life. And then through that relationship over time is where they ultimately move toward really where like the value exchange would happen. Right. But that doesn't happen in a quick thing. And unfortunately, too many real estate professionals are doing the equivalent of thinking, I'm gonna go and buy somebody a drink, and then they're gonna buy a house with me. It's
Right.
like that's not often gonna happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you establish and you build that relationship, and so, but the reality is that's really hard to do. Like it's hard to be
Right.
consistent, like with that, right? Like, would you agree when it comes to, like, I mean, speak to this. I know for you, you've seen in practice that some of the things that you do work really well, to help you build authority and trust over time. The kind of content that we do now, I know you've actually done it in fits and spurts before, but it stops, right?
Right. Right.
Speak to that a little bit. Why has it stopped historically?
Like this type of content that we're creating here.
Yep.
Well, in real estate, I've been talking to my referrals while you sleep mastermind about this the last couple of weeks. The winter is kind of like your off season.
Right.
It's downtime, and I know a lot of coaches say now is when you grind, grind, grind. Find people who are going to move in the next 30 days. And
Right.
side note, what I've discovered happens then is I'm exhausted when business picks up, and so my mentor said, did this happen the year before? Yeah. What about the year before that? He said, why don't you enjoy time with your kids? Treat this like an off season, work on the important things,
Right.
and save up ahead of time. It's coming,
Right.
and then get ready. And he said, when does it usually pick up? And usually after Valentine's Day. And then, so part of it is when we're busy, we're really busy. Like
Right.
I've tracked, and about 75% of my business closes July to September historically every year.
Right.
And when I'm busy doing that, uh, I don't have a whole lot of time to do other stuff.
Right.
I've systemized my business. I'm not driving around, but the
Right.
typical agent, uh, when you're busy with that, you're driving around, you're putting out fires, especially if you're working with people that are in the confrontation phase. You know, you got the five things. Like, yeah, you got them to meet you. Good. They're not
Right.
avoiding you. Maybe you got them to hire you,
Right.
but they're still in the confrontation phase when it's time to get under contract. They're in the confrontation phase when it's time to get through the inspection and appraisal.
Right.
They're in the confrontation phase still the last 3 days. That's why, I was looking back, and it was actually 10 years ago that I built my team.
Right.
And what I realized is almost every agent, if they market to their sphere of influence, can do 20 deals a year.
Right.
But they lose half because they can't get them to meet with them. They lose half because they can't get them under contract. And they lose half because they can't get it to close. And so that's how the typical agent does 4 deals instead of 20.
Right.
And when you're busy, it's you're on call. And that's why I built referrals while you sleep. I know there's going to be times when me and you aren't going to be able to do the video this week.
Right.
If I'm busy in real estate. And that's why referrals while you sleep still run some of my videos from 2019 at times. They're
Right.
still relevant,
Right.
and whether, we're about to go to Puerto Rico for a month, and
Right.
we'll probably still do these, but if
Right.
I decided not to, like all my grocery store people are still going to see me
Right.
every week, every day, because they're online.
Right. And that, I mean, that's the key that you found. So there is some level of work required to get the thing up and running, right? Depending on how effective you want it to be, right? So like the absolute basic level, you make it super easy, where you got you collect testimonials and pictures, and that can actually be like a foundational part of what you're doing. That doesn't even have to rely on the videos. The videos really add a ton of power to it. But just like you said, you aren't continually having to work the system in order to have it go about. And so what most agents try to do is they try and build a system. So they try and build a system that will work, but they don't realize that what they're doing is they're constantly having to persuade everybody. They're building no influence, and they're just constantly on with persuasion. But
Ugh.
what's that?
I said, ugh. It exhausts me just thinking about it.
Right. And if you can keep it up, it works. People can be persuaded. You can pull them across the finish line. It is possible to do it. And some people seem to be wired to be able to. I have found that they're very rare, and tend to be a little bit a little bit high strung, maybe, right? But most people aren't wired that way. And just like you described, right? Like real estate is complex and chaotic at times. Life is complex and chaotic at times. And so building a system that will work regardless of if you have time to expend a ton of time in it right then is part of what you need, because the consistency matters. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to consistently be doing all the effort in order to do it, right? And so what's cool is that you've built a system that allows people to show up with inconsistency,
Right.
and still get the effect of consistent marketing. And it's not just consistent marketing, but it's consistent marketing to the right people, where a little bit goes a really long way. Because you could do consistent marketing, you could run consistent Facebook ads, run consistent Google ads, but every single one of those things creates people that require effort expended in order to get them to that compliant stage. Whereas what you do is you build a system that goes to the people that are already in the compliance stage. And so all you have to do is basically just make sure that they stay aware of you and that you're reinforcing that message of trust and authority. And so it just works so much better, which is part of what's so powerful. But yeah, go ahead.
What I've discovered is almost every real estate marketing thing, they charge you $2,000 a month to give you a 20-hour-a-week job. They may say no cold calling. I did this. I paid $850, went to their masterminds, no cold calling. Well, what they didn't tell me is I was going to spend $1,200 a month in lead generation, and then I was going to spend 20 hours a week following up with my leads to get them through these 3 levels.
Right.
And, I got a closing, and then of course, then they sell you the software to automatically follow up. But still, I'm in that competition phase with those. And, I say, hey, give me an hour a week for your first 90 days.
Right.
And we're just going to bring you people that are in this compliance phase.
Right.
Which is what we want. And, most content says, here's a list of bank foreclosures, or here's a list of luxury homes. Well, only 15% of people that are going to move this year. So the other 85% are going to ignore it. Right. Our content actually shows up to everyone. They pay attention to all of them because it's enjoyable. So, every year they're getting influenced more. So that whether it's this year or next, they're not ignoring you for 6 years.
Right.
They're getting influenced more and more, which of course equals referrals. I mean, my referrals have gone up. But then when they're ready, they come as compliant clients.
And let's talk about that a little bit in terms of what it looks like long term on that building of influence, because I think this really goes back to when we look at know, like, trust, and just this process of building out that trust more and more, and this idea of sense making, and like people constantly asking themselves the question, how do I relate to this person? We look at all the signals that we have available in order to build up our own picture of what the answer to that question is, right? And so what you do with Referrals While You Sleep is every time they go online, they will see your face nearly every time, most likely. And the ways that they're seeing your face matters a ton, because they're going to see pictures of you in your daily life with friends, family, whatever makes sense for you. They're happy pictures, they're fun pictures. They feel like this is a person I can connect to. That reinforces the like part, that you're a real human, right?
Yeah.
They're also seeing reviews and testimonials from past clients. That lets them know people like me like working, hitting my mic over here, like working with this person, right? And so in their sense making, we have this instinctive, need to trust that social feedback, right? That social proof of what's going on. There's a reason why when you're looking to buy something on Amazon, you see one thing has 500 reviews, most of which are positive, and one thing has one review which is completely positive. You will still typically lean toward that thing that has lots of reviews, right? Like that's more meaningful. Similarly, if you're going out, you're picking a restaurant, you've got, business that's been in business for a while and only has a handful of reviews versus brand new business, but they have tons of reviews. You're probably going to go to the one that has lots of reviews because that's a very powerful thing. So when we're continually putting those reviews in front of people, they may not be reading them all, right? It may not be, they're not going to be sitting there and like, oh, they said this. Oh, okay. It's not that. It's just this kind of,
it's just real quick, subconscious. Their eyes go to the picture because they're online looking for, that. And then subconsciously they see the testimonial. And what's cool about that is, we know testimonials and reviews work. The problem is people only see them when they're ready. Right. So what we do is we take them and we make sure that it's in front of them and they see them, even subconsciously.
Right. Exactly. And so that's part of the system. The other part of the system is this other way of showing not only do people like working with me, but I am an expert that is trusted by other experts as well. Right. And that's where the duo video concept comes into play. Because not only are you speaking with authority, but you're doing it in a peer-based conversation with another expert. And that is another social signal of people saying smart people trust them. Smart people consider them a peer. Right. And so they're seeing that continually. And again, they may not watch any of the videos. Like it may literally just be that impression of seeing it as they're swiping through other things. It might just be that impression of the content where they see a little bit of the caption, they see the video, they may or may not watch it, but regardless, they are being impressioned with this continual level of building that trust and authority, regardless of what they do with it. But here's the powerful thing. When they are ready to do a transaction, or when they start getting to that level, they suddenly will be interested in the content and they will start watching and listening and further deepening that level of connection and that level of trust building until, you give them the opportunity when the time is right that they binge. And then when the time is right further from there, they reach out. Right. And not everybody's going to binge, but it depends on how established the relationship is, but you sort of have this process that it's always there ready for when they're ready to move forward. And, it doesn't take you constantly putting out something new all the time and putting out new content all the time, right? It doesn't take you doing that perfectly. And it doesn't take you following up with people constantly. These are people who already know, like, and trust you. So this is your follow-up. This is the way that you're being consistent. Sure. However you met them, you'll still potentially interact with them. Right. But maybe not. Right. Like I know you've talked about there's people that you don't really interact with anymore, but you still see deals come through because your system's working the way that it's supposed to. So sometimes even the people that you're not getting those real world interactions with are still exclusively converted through this continual process. But yeah, those were some of my biggest takeaways from this process. One of the other points, I don't think we mentioned this yet, but when we look at know, like, trust, when it comes to real estate, lending, etc., people legitimately, they go 7 years between transactions readily, right? Sometimes longer, sometimes less, but the average is about every 7 years. It's entirely possible that people don't even know if you're in the business anymore if that was the last time they heard from you. Right. And this is something that we were talking about earlier. When for you, Charlie, was the last time you had somebody who knew you asking you if you're still in the business?
Yeah. Well, before, the funny answer to that, before I answer that, is one of the most fascinating things that I had was I would send, I told, I used to
Right.
send a newsletter and a postcard, and I still got a few people that get that. And I would
Right.
have people that got my newsletter that would actually call me and say, "Hey, are you still in the business?"
Right.
Because that's all they got.
Right.
And so, I mean, I can't remember the last time someone asked if I'm still in the business. I mean, over 3 years ago, you
Right.
know, um, and I never talk about real estate. Other people mention real estate to me,
Right.
and then I'll have that conversation. But yeah, I mean, and I think what's cool about it is like, I always meet new people because one of the
Right.
fallacies is you got to find strangers that are going to move because you got to meet new people. But if you've got people person power, which most realtors and lenders do, you're
Right.
naturally going to meet new people. I probably meet a handful of new people every month.
Right.
And right now it's my jujitsu crew. In the past, we've our kids have gone to different schools, and
Right.
we've had different hobbies. I had my pickleball crew. I've got my yacht club crew,
Right.
and there's people that I haven't talked to in 7, 8 years that were
Right.
part of my crew, but like we built that trust. I'm in that compliance client part if they remember me,
Right.
and so my list is I've got over 3,500 people in my list of people that I've known over the last X years. And I actually just yesterday I had a call and I looked and I haven't talked to this guy since I think me and Cassie just got married and we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. So I mean it's been 20 years. And he was talking to one of our mutual friends that I haven't talked to in probably 5 years. Maybe we've talked twice. And his grandma passed away. They're trying to figure out what to do with the house. And so I get a text from John that says, "Hey, it's your old pal John." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, I mean, I literally haven't talked to him in almost 20 years,
Right.
And we get on a phone, and like I'm just able to give him the information and guide him.
Right.
And you know that was a call yesterday. I've got another friend I'm working with, helped him buy a house 10 years ago, and um, we're going to sell his house, and he's engaged. And I've only met his wife or his fiance twice. And before we get off the call, she's like, "Thank you so much for your help. Our just to let you know, our lease is up in July, and we'd
Right.
love to help you once you sell this house. If the timing works out, like we want you to help us get a new house before
Right.
then." And I'm just used to that. I've got, this is the slow time, and I've been playing this game called Brotato with the kids, and we beat level 1 today finally. And I got people calling me, and they're compliant, and I
Right.
can give them really, really great advice and knock it out of the park for them.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like that to me, that's the key. I think, you could tell that your system's working because I think it really is normal that the people that know you still ask, "Hey, are you still in the business?" Right? Unless they're seeing you every day, unless it comes up in conversation. I mean, it makes sense that somebody won't ask all the time if they hear you talking about client stories recently and that sort of thing. Uh, but yeah, groups of people that you don't talk to continually, but are seeing your referrals while you sleep system working on your behalf. They don't even ask anymore. They just know and they come to you for help. And like that to me, going back to what we started with here, right? That to me is one of the biggest signs that you have built a system that builds influence because you exist in their mind outside of you directly having to do anything. They're coming to you knowing that you're in the business and just wanting your help rather than coming to you thinking maybe you might be and seeing if you could help them, right? Like they already know. And that like what's powerful is that you figured out that it doesn't just work for you. It's working for tons of people that you have as part of the referrals while you sleep system already. It's proven out. You built this for yourself first, but made it available to other people to be able to run that process too. Um, and man, what I love too is that this is completely unlike basically anything else that I've seen. There's maybe a handful of systems that try to do something similar, and I think fail wildly for a number of different reasons. But what you're doing is incredibly unique in the space, so people may not be used to it. And so what I love that you've done is that you've set up a way for people to be able to experience it, to be able to see what it's like, to see how it might work for them, and not have any risk in the process. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. I mean, people don't believe that this life is possible. I've got an interview with my former showing agent, Luke. And, I asked him, I was like, hey, what did you think when we met, when I told you about my business? He said, I'd been coached that you have to door knock and expired. And, like, I didn't believe you. I didn't think it was possible. And, I said, well, what do you do? He said, now I've seen it. Like, we've worked together for 5 years. Like, you go on trips with your family and you make really good money, and the clients you work with follow your direction.
Right.
And, we've all, as real estate agents, we've given our money to people that, we buy it. I was just talking to one yesterday. She spent $3,000 and got nothing out of it. There's another, another friend, she spent 24 grand the last year, and she got herself a 20-hour a week job. She was going to, get compliant clients through YouTube, all these strangers. And it was 20 hours a week. And so to prove that it works, I actually offer a 90-day trial if you qualify, and the doors are open.
Right.
And you can go to referralswhileyouSleep.com and check out, see if we're open or get on the waiting list. And 90 days, hop in there, see if it works for you. And you don't pay me a penny until 90 days,
right?
Which is, I mean, I don't know of anyone else that does anything like that.
And that's only if you decide to continue, right? So you get to try it out, you get to see the results. Charlie and his team will do the work in advance. If you want to continue after seeing what that looks like, that's the first time that you have to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
And I love, the reality is, you have built this to be in service. It does take time. It does take effort on your team's part, which is part of the power of this, is that you've removed as much of the work as possible from the people who are signing up, and you've put it back on yourselves, right? You've built the team around being able to make this possible. But that also means that there is limited capacity, that every month you're only able to onboard so many people. So when he talks about a waiting list, it's not an arbitrary thing. There really is, there's only so many people that can get started. So if you're interested, you want to make sure you get started as soon as possible. I highly recommend that you get signed up. If there's a waiting list, get on it so that you're at the front of the line when they have openings available. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thanks for this. I love that you saw that, and I've got the influence with you where you're listening to Andrew and you're like, oh my gosh, it connects with referrals while you sleep.
Absolutely.
And awesome. Well, thank you again. This is Zach Hammer with the Real Estate Growth Hackers, and also my AI mentor. Tell them a little bit about AMP Intel.
Yeah. So in this day and age, with how much AI has come along, it's changing the way that we can do business. It's not just a gimmicky thing. It's literally everything that I do at this point. I'm leveraging AI in some part of the process to make it quicker and more efficient. But there's a lot to learn in terms of how it goes together with your current team. AI is not going to replace most of your processes, but it may make the current processes that you're doing drastically more efficient, drastically more effective, may unlock your ability to do things that you never thought possible. And so at AMP Intel, that's what we're doing. So we're helping, business owners, team leaders connect with what can I do to actually have AI make a meaningful impact in my business to reduce time, workloads, cost, while still maintaining or accelerating your overall growth. And that's what we're up to. We're helping get people unblocked and get them moving forward based on what we've proven out ourselves and tested on your behalf. And so if people want to know more about that, the best place to go is zachhammer.me/contact. Get in contact with us and let us know that you're interested in learning more about what we're up to with the AMP Intel stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Zach. And I'm Charlie Madison, and we'll see y'all again.